Welcome back to my channel USA's Dark Secrets. If you are here for raw, real stories of betrayal and hard choices, stay with US and don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get started. The rain pelted against the windows of a lavish suburban mansion, its rhythmic drumming masking the tension brewing within. Lisa, a strikingly beautiful woman in her mid-30s, paced the bedroom nervously. Her husband, Mark, had been away on a business trip for weeks, and his imminent return loomed over her like a storm cloud. She glanced at the clock on the wall, its ticking louder with each passing second, amplifying her unease. Downstairs, Jake, her stepbrother, lounged on the couch, his confident demeanor a stark contrast to Lisa's agitation. The two had shared a complicated relationship since their teenage years, a bond that had veered into forbidden territory when they reconnected as adults. They told themselves it was a fleeting mistake, an indiscretion born of loneliness and unresolved feelings. But the evidence of their actions now grew within Lisa, a child, the truth of which she had carefully concealed from Mark. Lisa descended the staircase, her heels clicking against the polished wood. Jake's piercing blue eyes locked onto hers, a silent, understanding passing between them. "He's coming home tonight," she whispered, her voice trembling. Jake leaned forward, his jaw tightening. "Then it's time to come clean, Lisa. Secrets like this don't stay buried forever." "No," she hissed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mark can never know. This baby, our mistake, it will destroy everything." Jake stood, his imposing frame towering over her. "It's already destroying you," he said, his voice laced with regret and frustration. Before either could continue, the sound of tires crunching against gravel echoed outside. Mark was home. Panic gripped Lisa as she darted back upstairs, Jake following closely behind. She had barely closed the bedroom door when the front door swung open, Mark's deep voice calling out cheerfully, "Honey, I'm home." The seconds felt like hours as Mark climbed the stairs, his footsteps steady and deliberate. Lisa's heart pounded in her chest, the walls closing in as the door to the bedroom creaked open. Mark's smile faltered as he took in the scene. Lisa, disheveled and pale, standing too close to Jake, whose expression betrayed his guilt. "What's going on here?" Mark demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Lisa stammered, searching for an explanation, but Mark's sharp gaze shifted to Jake. "You've always been too close to her," he accused, his suspicions finally finding voice. "But this is something else, isn't it?" Jake opened his mouth to respond, but Lisa interrupted, her voice breaking. "Mark, please. It's not what it looks like." "Oh, really?" Mark's tone was laced with sarcasm, his anger simmering just below the surface. "Then why don't you tell me what it is? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like I've been played for a fool." The tension erupted as Mark lunged at Jake, shoving him against the wall. Lisa screamed, trying to separate them, but Mark's rage was unrelenting. "How long?" he roared. "How long has this been going on?" When Jake didn't respond, Mark's attention snapped back to Lisa. "And the baby?" he demanded, his voice shaking with a mix of fury and dread. "Is it mine? Or is it his?" Lisa froze, the weight of her betrayal crashing down on her. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "Mark, Her silence was answer enough. Mark staggered back, his world crumbling around him. The love of his life had not only betrayed him, but carried another man's child, his own stepbrother's. He turned away, unable to look at either of them. "You disgust me," he spat, his voice devoid of the warmth it once held. Lisa reached out to him, desperation in her voice. "Mark, please. I never wanted to hurt you." You didn't just hurt me," he interrupted, his voice rising. "You destroyed me. You destroyed us." As the night stretched on, the once perfect life Mark thought he had unraveled piece by piece. Lisa's pleas fell on deaf ears, her confession only deepening the chasm between them. And Jake, the man he had trusted as family, stood silently, a symbol of the ultimate betrayal. Mark stormed out of the room, his breathing heavy and ragged. The The sound of the front door slamming echoed through the house, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. Lisa sank to the floor, her sobs muffled by her trembling hands. Jake stood frozen, his eyes fixed on the doorway where Mark had disappeared. "He'll never forgive us," Lisa whispered, her voice hollow. Jake knelt beside her, his hand brushing her shoulder. "We'll figure this out," he said softly, though the words felt empty even to him. Lisa looked at him, her tear-streaked face filled with despair. "How? How can we possibly fix this? We've ruined everything." Meanwhile, Mark drove aimlessly through the rain-soaked streets, his mind racing. Flashes of his life with Lisa played in his head. Their wedding day, the plans for their future, the nights they had spent talking about starting a family. Now, every memory felt like a cruel joke, tainted by her betrayal. His grip tightened on the steering wheel as he pulled over into a deserted parking lot. For the first time in years, he let himself cry. Back at the house, Lisa and Jake sat in tense silence. The weight of their actions pressed down on them, suffocating any attempts at conversation. Finally, Jake spoke, his voice strained. "Maybe it's best if I leave for a while. Give you and Mark space to sort things out." Lisa shook her head vehemently. "No, you can't leave me. I can't do this alone." Her voice cracked with desperation. Jake hesitated, torn between his desire to support her and the knowledge that his presence only complicated things further. Hours later, Mark returned. His face was pale, his eyes red and swollen, but his expression was steely. He found Lisa and Jake still in the living room, their faces etched with guilt and dread. Mark's voice was cold and detached. "We're going to talk. All of us. Right now." Lisa swallowed hard, nodding. Jake shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Mark sat across from them, his posture rigid, his gaze piercing. "Start from the beginning," he demanded. "I want to know everything." Lisa's voice wavered as she began to recount the events that had led to this moment. She spoke of loneliness, of unresolved feelings for Jake that had resurfaced when they reconnected, of the nights she had spent agonizing over her choices. Jake interjected occasionally, his words filled with regret, but offering little in the way of justification. Mark listened in silence, his face a mask of unreadable emotions. When Lisa finished, the room fell silent again, the weight of her confession hanging heavily in the air. Finally, Mark spoke, his voice low but firm. "Do you love him?" The question hit Lisa like a blow. She hesitated, her mind racing. Did she love Jake? Or was their relationship born out of a toxic mix of familiarity and forbidden desire? "I don't know," she admitted finally, her voice barely audible. Mark leaned forward, his eyes burning with intensity. "And the baby? What do you plan to do about that?" Lisa looked down at her hands, her stomach churning. "I don't know," she repeated. Mark stood abruptly, pacing the room. "You don't know? You've turned my life upside down, destroyed everything we had, and you don't know?" His voice rose with each word, his anger finally breaking through his controlled exterior. Jake stepped forward, his own guilt giving way to a protective instinct. "Mark, I know I've wronged you, but this isn't just about you. Lisa is carrying my child. We need to figure out what's best for everyone involved." Mark rounded on him, his expression filled with contempt. "Don't you dare act like the voice of reason now. You've already done enough damage." The tension in the room was palpable, each word cutting deeper than the last. But as the argument raged on, Lisa suddenly doubled over, a sharp pain shooting through her abdomen. Both men froze, their anger replaced by concern. "Lisa," Mark said, rushing to her side. Jake was close behind, his hand on her arm. "I think something's wrong," Lisa gasped, clutching her stomach. Mark didn't hesitate. "We're going to the hospital. Now!" The drive to the hospital was silent, the earlier chaos overshadowed by fear for Lisa and the baby. Once they arrived, she was whisked away by nurses, leaving Mark and Jake in an uncomfortable limbo in the waiting room. The two men avoided eye contact, the weight of their shared guilt hanging heavily between them. Hours passed before a doctor finally emerged, his expression neutral. Lisa and the baby are stable for now, he said. But the stress she's under isn't helping. She needs rest and support. Mark nodded, his relief tempered by the reality of their situation. As he and Jake entered Lisa's hospital room, they found her pale and exhausted but awake. Her eyes filled with tears as she saw them. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for everything." Mark sat beside her, his expression softening for the first time. "We'll figure this out," he said, though the path ahead remained uncertain.